Story 1. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 1. Uncle Wiggily Starts Off. Uncle Wiggily Longears, the nice old gentleman rabbit, hopped out of bed one morning and started to go to the window to see if the sun was shining. But no sooner had he stepped on the floor than he cried out, "Oh, ouch! Oh, dear me! And a potato pancake! Oh, I believe I stepped on a tack. Sammie Littletail must have left it there. How careless of him!" You see, this was the same Uncle Wiggily of whom I have told you in the bedtime books, the very same Uncle Wiggily. He was an uncle to Sammie and Susie Littletail, the rabbit children, and also to Billie and Johnnie Bushytail, the squirrel boys, and to Alice and Lulu and Jimmie Wibblewobble, the duck children. And I have written for you books about all those characters. Now I thought I would write something just about Uncle Wiggily himself, though of course I'll tell you what all his nephews and nieces did too. Well, when Uncle Wiggily felt that sharp pain, he stood still for a moment and wondered what could have happened. "Yes, I'm almost sure it was a tack," he said. "I must pick it up so no one else will step on it." So Uncle Wiggily looked on the floor, but there was no tack there, only some crumbs from a sugar cookie that Susie Littletail had been eating the night before when her uncle had told her a go-to-sleep story. "Oh, I know what it is. It must have been my rheumatism that gave me the pain," said the old gentleman rabbit as he looked for his red, white and blue crutch, striped like a barber pole. He found it under the bed, and then he managed to limp to the window. Surely enough, the sun was shining. "I'll certainly have to do something about this rheumatism," said Uncle Wiggily, as he carefully shaved himself by looking in the glass. "I guess I'll see Dr. Possum." So after breakfast, when Sammie and Susie had gone to school, Dr. Possum was telephoned for, and he called to see Uncle Wiggily. "Ha-hum!" exclaimed the doctor, looking very wise. "You have the rheumatism very bad, Mr. Longears." "Why, I knew that before you came," said the old rabbit gentleman, blinking his eyes. "What I want is something to cure it." "Ha-hum!" said Dr. Possum, again looking very wise. "I think you need a change of air. You must travel about, go on a journey, get out and see strange birds, and pick the pretty flowers. You don't get exercise enough." "Exercise enough!" cried Uncle Wiggily. "Why, my goodness me sakes alive and a bunch of lilacs! Don't I play checkers almost every night with Grandfather Goosey Gander?" "That is not enough," said the doctor. "You must travel here and there and see things." "Very well," said Uncle Wiggily. "Then I will travel. I'll pack my valise at once, and I'll go off and seek my fortune, and maybe, on the way, I can lose this rheumatism." So the next day Uncle Wiggily started out with his crutch and his valise packed full of clean clothes and something in it to eat. "Oh, we are very sorry to have you go, dear uncle," said Susie Littletail, "but we hope you will come back good and strong." "Thank you," said Uncle Wiggily, as he kissed the two rabbit children and their mamma, and shook hands with Papa Littletail. Then off the old gentleman bunny hopped with his crutch. Well, he went along for quite a distance over the hills and down the road and through the woods, and as the sun got higher and warmer, his rheumatism felt better. "I do believe Dr. Possum was right," said Uncle Wiggily. "Traveling is just the thing for me," and he felt so very jolly that he whistled a little tune about a peanut wagon, which roasted lemonade, and boiled and frizzled Easter eggs that Mrs. Cluck Cluck had laid. "Ha! Where are you going?" suddenly asked a voice, as Uncle Wiggily finished the tune. "I'm going to seek my fortune," replied Uncle Wiggily. "Who are you, pray?" "Oh, I'm a friend of yours," said the voice, and Uncle Wiggily looked all around, but he couldn't discover any one. "But where are you?" the puzzled old gentleman rabbit wanted to know. "I can't see you." "No, and for a very good reason," answered the voice. "You see I have very weak eyes, and if I came out in the sun without my smoked glasses on I might get blind. So I have to hide down in this hollow stump." "Then put on your glasses and come out where I can see you," invited the old gentleman rabbit, and all the while he was trying to remember where he had heard that voice before. At first he thought it might be Grandfather Goosey Gander, or Uncle Butter, the goat. Yet it didn't sound like either of them. "I have sent my glasses to the store to be fixed, so I can't wear them and come out," went on the voice. "But if you are seeking your fortune, I know the very place where you can find it." "Where?" asked Uncle Wiggily eagerly. "Right down in this hollow stump," was the reply. "There are all kinds of fortunes here, and you may take any kind you like, Mr. Longears." "Ha! That is very nice," thought the rabbit. "I have not had to travel far before finding my fortune. I wonder if there is a cure for rheumatism in that stump, too." So he asked about it. "Of course your rheumatism can be cured in here," came the quick answer. "In fact, I guarantee to cure any disease measles, chicken pox, mumps, and even toothache. So if you have any friends you want cured, send them to me." "I wish I could find out who you were," spoke the rabbit. "I seem to know your voice, but I can't think of your name." "Oh, you'll know me as soon as you see me," said the voice. "Just hop down inside this hollow stump, and your fortune is as good as made, and your rheumatism will soon be gone. Hop right down." Well, Uncle Wiggily didn't like the look of the black hole down inside the stump, and he peered into it to see what he could see. But it was so black that all he could make out was something like a lump of coal. "Well, Dr. Possum said I needed to have a change of scene, and some adventures," said the rabbit, "so I guess I'll chance it. I'll go down, and perhaps I may find my fortune." Then, carefully holding his crutch and his satchel, Uncle Wiggily hopped down inside the stump. He felt something soft, and furry, and fuzzy, pressing close to him, and at first he thought he had bumped into Dottie or Willie Lambkin. But then, all of a sudden, a harsh voice cried out: "Ha! Now I have you! I was just wishing some one would come along with my dinner, and you did. Get in there and see if you can find your fortune, Uncle Wiggily." And with that, what should happen but that big, black bear, who had been hiding in the stump, pushed Uncle Wiggily into a dark corner and locked the door. And there the poor rabbit was, and the bear was getting ready to eat him up. But don't worry, I'll find a way to get him out. And in case we have ice cream pancakes for supper, I'll tell you, in the next story, how Uncle Wiggily got out of the bear's den, and how he went fishing. I mean Uncle Wiggily went fishing, not the bear. End of story 1. Story 2 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 2. Uncle Wiggily Goes Fishing. At first, after he found himself shut up in the bear's dark closet, where we left him in the story before this, poor Uncle Wiggily didn't know what to think. He just sat there on the edge of a chair, and he tried to look around and see something, but it was too black, so he couldn't. "Perhaps this is only a joke," thought the old gentleman rabbit, "though I never knew a black bear to joke before. But perhaps it is. I'll ask him." So Uncle Wiggily called out: "Is this a joke, Mr. Bear?" "Not a bit of it," was the growling answer. "You'll soon see what's going to happen to you. I'm getting the fire ready now." "Getting the fire ready for what? The adventure, or for my fortune?" asked the rabbit, for he still hoped the bear was only joking with him. "Ready to cook you," was the reply. "That's what the fire is for." And the bear gnashed his teeth together something terrible, and, with his sharp claws, he clawed big splinters off the stump, and with them he started the fire in the stove. With the splinters, I mean, not his claws. The blazing fire made it a little brighter in the hollow stump, which was the black bear's den, and Uncle Wiggily could look out of a crack in the door, and see what a savage fellow the shaggy bear was. You see, that bear just hid in the stump, waiting for helpless animals to come along, and then he'd trick them into jumping down inside of it, and there wasn't a word of truth about him having sore eyes, or about him having to wear dark spectacles either. "Oh, my! I guess this is the end of my adventures," thought the rabbit. "I should have been more careful. Well, I wish I could see Sammie and Susie before he eats me, but I'm afraid I can't. I shouldn't have jumped down here." But as Uncle Wiggily happened to think of Sammie Littletail, the boy rabbit, he also thought of something else. And this was that Sammie had put something in the old gentleman rabbit's valise that morning, before his uncle had started off. "If you ever get into trouble, Uncle Wiggily," Sammie had said, "this may come in useful for you." Uncle Wiggily didn't look at the time to see what it was that his nephew put in the valise, but he made up his mind he would do so now. So he opened his satchel, and there, among other things, was a long piece of thin, but strong rope, and pinned to it was a note which read: "Dear Uncle Wiggily, this is good to help you get out of a window, in case of fire." "My goodness!" exclaimed Uncle Wiggily. "That's fine. There the bear is making a fire to cook me, and with this rope I can get away from it. Now if there's only a window in this closet I'm all right." So he looked, and sure enough there was a window, and with his crutch Uncle Wiggily raised it. Then he threw out his satchel, and he tied the rope to a hook on the window sill, and, being a strong old gentleman, he crawled out of the window and slid down the cord. And Uncle Wiggily got out just as the bear opened the closet door to grab him and put him in the pot. And when the savage black bear saw his fine rabbit dinner getting away he was as angry as anything. Really he was. "Here! Come back here!" cried the bear, but of course Uncle Wiggily knew better than to come back. He slid down the rope to the ground, and then he cut off as much of the rope as he could and put it in his pocket, for he didn't know when he might need it again. Then, catching up his valise, he ran on and on before the bear could get him. It was still quite a dark place in which Uncle Wiggily was, for you see he was underground, down by the roots of the stump. But he looked ahead and he saw a glimmer of light, and then he knew he could get out. Limping on his crutch, and carrying his valise, he went on, and pretty soon he came out of a dark cave and found himself on the bank of a nice little brook that was running over mossy green stones. "Ha! This is better than being in a bear's den!" exclaimed the old gentleman rabbit. "My, I was so frightened that I forgot about my rheumatism hurting me. That was an adventure all right, and Sammie was a good boy to think of that strong cord. Now what shall I do next?" Well, Uncle Wiggily sat down on the bank of the brook, and he looked in the water. Then he happened to see a fish jump up to catch a bug, so he said to himself: "I guess I will go fishing, just for fun. But if I do happen to catch any fish I'll put them right back in the water again, for I don't need any fish, as I have some lettuce and cabbage sandwiches, and some peanut butter cakes that Susie's mamma put up in a cracker box for me." Well, Uncle Wiggily looked in his valise to make sure his lunch was safe, and then, taking a bent pin from under his vest, he fastened it to a part of the string Sammie had given him. Then he fastened the string to a pole, and he was ready to fish, but he needed something to make the fishes bite, that is, bite the pin hook, not bite him, you know. "Oh, I guess they'll like a bit of sweet cracker," Uncle Wiggily thought. So he put some on the end of the pin hook, and threw it toward the water. It fell in with a splash, and made a lot of little circles, like ring around the rosies, and the rabbit sat there looking at them, sort of nodding, and half asleep, and wondering what adventure would happen to him next, and where he would stay that night. All of a sudden he felt something tugging at the hook and line. "Oh, I've got a fish! I've got a fish!" he cried, and he lifted up the pole. Up out of the water, with a sizzling rush, flew the string and the sweet cracker bait, and the next minute out leaped the big, savage alligator that had escaped from a circus. "Oh, ho! You tried to catch me, eh?" the alligator shouted at Uncle Wiggily. "No, no, if you please," said the rabbit. "I was after fish." "And I'm after you!" cried the alligator, and scrambling up the bank he made a jump for Uncle Wiggily, and with one sweep of his kinky, scaly tail he flopped and he threw the old gentleman rabbit and his crutch and valise right up into a big tree that grew near the brook. "There you'll stay until I get ready to eat you!" exclaimed the alligator, as he stood up on the end of his tail under the tree and opened his mouth as wide as he could, so that if Uncle Wiggily fell down he'd fall into it, just like down a funnel, you know. Well, the poor gentleman rabbit clung to the topmost tree branch, wondering how in the world he was going to escape from the alligator. Oh, it was a dreadful position to be in. But please don't worry or stay awake over it, for I'll find a way to get him down safely. And in the story after this, if the milkman doesn't leave us sour cream for our lemonade, I'll tell you about Uncle Wiggily and the Black Crow. End of story 2. Story 3 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 3. Uncle Wiggily and the Black Crow. Let me see, where did I leave off in the last story? Oh, I remember. It was about Uncle Wiggily Longears being up in the top of the tall tree, and the alligator keeping guard down below, ready to eat him. Well, the old gentleman rabbit was wondering how he could ever escape, and he felt quite badly about it. "I guess this is the end of my adventures," he said to himself. "It would have been much better had I stayed at home with Sammie and Susie." And as he thought of the two rabbit children he felt still sadder and very lonely. "I wonder if Susie could have put anything in my satchel with which to scare an alligator," thought Uncle Wiggily. "I guess I'll look." So he looked, and what should he find but a bottle of toothache drops. Yes, there it was, and wrapped round it was a little note Susie had written. "Dear Uncle Wiggily," she said in the note, "if you ever get the toothache on your travels, this will stop it." "Ha! That is very kind of Susie, I'm sure," said the rabbit. "But I don't see how that is going to make the alligator go away. And even if he does go, I wonder how I'm to get down out of this tall tree, with my crutch, my valise and my rheumatism." Well, just then the alligator got tired of standing on the end of his tail, with his mouth open, and he began crawling around. Then he thought of what a good supper he was going to have of Uncle Wiggily, and that alligator said, "Guess I'll sharpen my teeth so I can eat him better." And with that, the savage and unpleasant creature began to gnaw on a stone to sharpen his teeth. Then he stood up on the end of his tail once more, under the tree, and opened his mouth as wide as he could. "Come on now," he called to Uncle Wiggily. "Jump down and have it over with." "Oh, but I don't want to," objected the rabbit. "You'll have to, whether you want to or not," went on the alligator. "If you don't come down, I'll take my scaly naily tail, and I'll saw down the tree, and then you'll fall." "Oh, dear!" exclaimed Uncle Wiggily. "What shall I do?" Then he happened to think of the bottle of toothache medicine that he held in his hand, and taking out the cork, he dropped the bottle, medicine and all, right into the open mouth of the alligator, who was again up on his tail. And the alligator thought it was Uncle Wiggily falling into his jaws, and he shut them quickly like a steel trap and chewed on that bottle of hot toothache drops before he knew what it was. Well, you can just imagine what happened. The medicine was as hot as pepper and mustard and vinegar and cloves and horseradish all made into one. My, how it did burn that alligator's mouth. "Oh, my! I'm shot! I'm poisoned! I'm bitten by a mosquito! I'm stabbed! I'm all scrambled up!" cried the alligator. "Water! Water! Quick! I must have water!" Then he gave a big jump, and, with his kinkery, scalery tail, he leaped into a big puddle of water, and went away down in under, out of sight, to cool off his mouth. "Oh, now is my chance! If I could only get down out of this tree!" exclaimed Uncle Wiggily. "But with my rheumatism I'm afraid I'll fall. Oh, dear! What shall I do?" "Don't be afraid, I'll help you!" exclaimed a kind voice, and then the voice went on, "Caw, caw, caw!" and Uncle Wiggily, looking up, saw a big black crow perched on a limb over his head. "Oh, how do you do?" spoke Uncle Wiggily, making a bow as well as he could. "Can you really help me down?" "Yes," said the crow, "I can. Wait until I get my market basket. I was just going to the grocery, but I'm in no hurry. I'll save you first." So that crow flew off, and in a moment he came back with a big basket in its bill. "Hop in," the black crow called to Uncle Wiggily, "and I'll fly down to the ground with you, and you can run off before the alligator comes out of the water. I saw what you did to him with those toothache drops, and it served him right. Come on, hop in the basket." So Uncle Wiggily got in the basket, and the crow, taking the handle in his strong beak, flew safely to the ground with him. And that's how the old gentleman rabbit got down out of the tree, just as I told you he would. So he and the crow walked on some distance through the woods together, after Uncle Wiggily had picked up his crutch and valise, which had fallen out of the basket, and they got safely away before the alligator came out of the water. And wasn't he the provoked old beastie, though, when he saw that his rabbit's supper was gone. "Where are you going?" asked the crow of Uncle Wiggily, after a bit, when they got to a nice big stone, and sat down for a rest. "I am seeking my fortune," replied the old gentleman rabbit, "and trying to get better of my rheumatism. Dr. Possum told me to travel, and have adventures, and I've had quite a few already." "Well, I hope you find your fortune, and that it turns out to be a very good one," said the kind crow. "But it is coming on night now. Have you any place to stay?" "No," replied the rabbit, "I haven't. I never thought about that. What shall I do?" "Oh, don't worry," said the crow. "I'd let you stay in my nest, but it is up a high tree, and you would have trouble climbing in and out. But near my nest is an old hollow stump, and you can stay in that very nicely." "Are there any bears in it?" asked Uncle Wiggily, careful like. "Oh, no, not a one. It is very safe." So the crow showed Uncle Wiggily where the hollow stump was, and he slept there all night on a soft bed of leaves. And when he awakened in the morning he had breakfast with the crow, and once more started off to seek his fortune. Well, pretty soon, in a short while, not so very long, he came to a little house made of bark, standing in the middle of a deep, dark, dismal woods. And on the door of the house was a sign which read: "If you want to be surprised, open this door and come in." "Perhaps I can find my fortune in there, and get rid of the rheumatism," thought Uncle Wiggily. So he hopped forward, and just as he did so he heard a voice calling to him. "Don't go in! Don't go in there, Uncle Wiggily!" The rabbit looked up and saw Johnnie Bushytail, the squirrel boy, waving his paws at him. Well, Uncle Wiggily started to jump back away from the door of the little house, but it was too late. Out came a scraggly, raggly claw which grabbed him, while a voice cried out: "Aha! Now I have you! Come right in!" And then, before you could shake a stick at a bad dog, the door was slammed shut and locked, and there Uncle Wiggily was inside the house, and Johnnie Bushytail was crying outside. "That's the end of poor Uncle Wiggily," said Johnnie. But it wasn't, for I'll not leave the old gentleman rabbit alone in the house with that clawy creature, and in the next story, providing our wash lady doesn't put my new straw hat in the soap suds, and take all the color out of the ribbon, I'll tell you about Uncle Wiggily and Fido Flip-Flop. End of story 3. Story 4 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garis. Story 4. Uncle Wiggily and Fido Flip-Flop. Well, as soon as Uncle Wiggily found himself inside the bear's den. Oh, just listen to me. That was in the other story, wasn't it? Yes, we left him in the funny little house in the woods, with the clawy creature grabbing him. Now, what do you suppose that clawy creature was? Why, a great big owl, to be sure, with round, staring, yellow eyes, and he had grabbed Uncle Wiggily in his claws and pulled him inside the house. "Now I've got you!" cried the owl. "I was just wishing some one would come along, and you did. Some of my friends are coming to tea this afternoon, and you'll do very nicely made up into sandwiches." Wasn't that a perfectly dreadful way to talk about our Uncle Wiggily? Well, I guess yes. "Now you're here, make yourself at home," went on the owl, sarcastic like, as he locked the front door and put the key in his pocket. "Did you see the sign?" "Yes," said Uncle Wiggily, "I did. But I don't call it fair. I thought I would find my fortune here." "The sign says you'll be surprised, and I guess you are surprised, aren't you?" asked the owl. "Yes," answered the rabbit, "very much so. But I'd rather have a nice surprise party, with peanuts and lemonade, than this." "No matter," said the owl, snapping his beak like a pair of shears. "Here you are, and here you'll stay. My friends will soon arrive. I'll now put the kettle on to boil for tea." Well, poor Uncle Wiggily didn't know what to do. He couldn't look in his valise to see if there was anything in it by which he might escape, for he had dropped the satchel outside when the owl grabbed him, and he only had his barber pole crutch. "Oh, this is worse and worse," thought the poor old rabbit. But listen, Johnnie Bushytail is outside the owl's house, and he's going to do a wonderful trick. As soon as he saw the door shut on Uncle Wiggily, that brave squirrel boy began to plan how he could save him, and the first thing he did was to gather up a lot of acorns. Then he perched himself in a tree, right in front of the owl's door, and Johnnie began throwing acorns at it. Rat-a-tat-tat went the acorns on the wooden panels. "Ha! Those must be my friends!" exclaimed the bad owl, opening the door a little crack so he could peek out, but taking care to stand in front of it so that Uncle Wiggily couldn't slip out. But of course the owl saw no one. "It must have been the wind," he said as he shut the door. Then Johnny Bushytail threw some acorns at the door. Pitter patter patter pit they went, like hailstones in an ice cream can. "Ah, there are my friends sure this time," thought the owl, and once more he peered out, but no one was there. "It must have been a tree branch hitting against the door," said the owl, as he sharpened a big knife with which to make the sandwiches. Then Johnny threw some more acorns, and the owl now thought positively his friends were there, and when he opened it and saw no one, he was real mad. "Some one is playing tricks on me!" exclaimed the savage bird. "I'll catch them next time." Now this was just what Johnny Bushytail wanted, so he threw a whole double handful of acorns at the door, and when the owl heard them pattering against the wood he rushed out. "Now I've got you!" he cried. But he hadn't, for Johnny was up a tree, and for a moment the owl forgot about Uncle Wiggily, and there the door was wide open. "Run out, Uncle Wiggily! Run out!" cried Johnny, and out the old gentleman rabbit hopped, catching up his valise, and away into the woods he ran, with Johnny scurrying along in the tree tops above him and laughing at the owl, who flew back to his house, but too late to catch the bunny. "That's what you get for fooling people so they'll come into your house!" called the squirrel boy. "It serves you right, Mr. Owl. Come on, Uncle Wiggily. We'll get away from here." So they went on together until it was time for Johnny to go home, and he said he'd tell Uncle Wiggily's friends that he had met the old gentleman rabbit, and that he hadn't found his fortune yet, but that he was looking for it every minute, and had had many adventures. Well, Uncle Wiggily went on some more, for quite a distance, until it was noontime, and then he sat down in the cool green woods, where there were some jacks in the pulpit growing near some ferns, and there Uncle Wiggily ate his lunch of lettuce sandwiches, with carrot butter on them, and gnawed on a bit of potato. Just as he was almost through, he heard a rustling in the bushes, and a voice exclaimed: "Oh, dear!" "Why, what's the matter?" asked Uncle Wiggily, thinking perhaps an adventure was going to happen to him. "Who are you?" "Oh, dear!" exclaimed the voice again. Then, before the old rabbit could jump up and run away, even if he wanted to, out from under a big bush came a little white poodle dog with curly, silky hair. He walked right up to Uncle Wiggily, that dog did, and the rabbit wasn't a bit afraid, for the dog wasn't much bigger than he was, and looked very kind. "What do you want, doggie?" gently asked Uncle Wiggily. The dog didn't answer, but he gave a little short bark, and then he began turning somersaults. Over and over he went, sometimes backward and sometimes frontward and sometimes sideways. And when he was finished, he made a low bow and walked around on his two hind legs, just to show he wasn't proud or stuck up. "There!" exclaimed the poodle doggie. "Is that worth something to eat, Mr. Rabbit?" "Indeed it is," answered Uncle Wiggily. "But I would have given you something to eat without you doing all those tricks, though I enjoyed them very much. Where did you learn to do them?" "Oh, in the circus, where I used to be. I always had to do tricks for my dinner," said the doggie. "What is your name?" asked Uncle Wiggily. "Fido Flip Flop," was the answer. "You see they call me that because I turn so many flip flops." And then Uncle Wiggily gave him some lunch, and told the dog about how he, himself, was traveling all over in search of his fortune. "Why, that's just what I'm doing, too!" exclaimed Fido Flip Flop. "Suppose we travel together, and maybe we'll each find a fortune." "That's just what we'll do," agreed Uncle Wiggily. And then, all of a sudden, before you could open your eyes and shut them again, two savage foxes jumped out from behind a big stump. "You grab the dog, and I'll grab the rabbit," called the bigger fox, and right at Uncle Wiggily and Fido they sprang, gnashing their teeth. But don't worry, I'll find a way to save them, and if the canary bird doesn't take my lead pencil and stick it in his seed dish, I'll tell you in the following story about Uncle Wiggily doing some tricks. End of story 4. Story 5 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garis. Story 5. Uncle Wiggily Does Some Tricks. When those two savage ducks, foxes, when those two savage foxes jumped out of the bushes at Uncle Wiggily Longears and Fido Flip Flop, as I told you in the other story, the rabbit and the poodle doggie didn't know what in the world to do. "Run this way!" called Fido, starting off to the left. "No, hop this way," said Uncle Wiggily, hopping to the right. "Stand right where you are!" ordered the two foxes together. And with that one made a grab for Uncle Wiggily. But what did that brave rabbit gentleman do but stick his red, white and blue crutch out in front of him, and the fox bit on that instead of on Uncle Wiggily. Right into the crutch the fox's teeth sank, and for a moment Uncle Wiggily was safe, but not for long. "Ah, you fooled me that time, but now I'll get you!" cried the fox, and letting go of the crutch, he made another grab for the rabbit. But at that instant Fido Flip-Flop, who had been jumping about, keeping out of the way of the fox that was after him, cried out quite loudly: "Look here, everybody but Uncle Wiggily, and, as for you, shut both your eyes tight!" Now the old gentleman rabbit couldn't imagine why he was to shut his eyes tight, but he did so. And then what do you s'pose Fido Flip-Flop did? Why, he began turning somersaults so fast that he looked just like a pinwheel going around, or an automobile tire whizzing along. Faster and faster did Fido Flip-Flop turn around, and then, all of a sudden, he began chasing his tail, making motions just like a merry-go-round in a circus, until those two foxes were fairly dizzy from watching him. "Stop! Stop!" cried one fox. "Yes, do stop! We're so dizzy that we can't stand up!" cried the other fox, staggering about. "Stop!" "No, I'll not!" answered Fido Flip-Flop, and he went around faster than ever, faster and faster and faster, until those two bad foxes got so dizzy-izzy that they fell right over on their backs, with their legs sticking straight up in the air like clothes posts, and their tails were wiggling back and forth in the dirt like dusting brushes. Oh, but they were the dizzy foxes, though. "Now's your chance! Run! Run, Uncle Wiggily, run!" called Fido Flip-Flop. "Open your eyes and run!" So the old gentleman rabbit opened his eyes, took up his valise, which he had dropped, and hopping on his crutch, he and the poodle doggie ran on through the woods, leaving the two surprised and disappointed foxes still lying on their backs, wiggling their tails in the dust, and too dizzy from having watched Fido Flip-Flop do somersaults and chase his tail to be able to get up. "Why did you want me to shut my eyes?" asked Uncle Wiggily, when they were so far away from the foxes that there was no more danger. "That was so you wouldn't get dizzy from watching me do the flip-flops," answered the doggie. "My, but that was a narrow escape, though. Have you had many adventures like that since you started out to seek your fortune?" "Yes, several," answered the rabbit. "But turning flip-flops is a very good thing to know how to do. I wonder if you could teach me, so that when any more foxes or alligators chase me, I can make them dizzy by turning around. Can you teach me?" "I'm sure I can," said Fido. "Here, this is the way to begin," and he did some flip-flops slow and easy like. Then Uncle Wiggily tried them, and, though he couldn't do them very well at first, he practiced until he was quite good at it. Then Fido showed him how to stand on one ear, and wiggle the other, and how to blink his eyes while standing on the end of his little tail. And then Uncle Wiggily thought of a new trick all by himself. "I'll stick my crutch in the ground, like a clothes pole," he said to Fido, "and then I'll hop up on it and sing a song." Which he did sing a song that went like this: "Did you ever see a rabbit do a flipper flopper flap? If not, just kindly watch me, as I wear my baseball cap. It's very strange, some folks may say, and also rather funny, to see a kinky poodle dog play with a flip-flop bunny. But we are on our travels, adventures for to seek. We may find one or two or three, most any day next week." And then Uncle Wiggily hopped down and waved both ears backward and forward, and made a low bow to a make-believe crowd of people, only, of course, there were none there. "Fine! Fine!" cried Fido Flip-Flop. "That's better than I did when I was in the circus. Now I'll tell you what let's do." "What?" asked Uncle Wiggily. "Let's go around and give little shows and entertainments for the little folks to see," went on the poodle doggie. "I can turn flip-flops, and you can stand on your head on your crutch, and sing a song, and then we'll take up a collection. I'll pass my hat, and perhaps we may make our fortune. Who knows?" "Who indeed?" said Uncle Wiggily. "We'll do it." So off they started together to give a little show and make some money. And, as they went on through the woods, they practiced doing the tricks Uncle Wiggily had learned. Well, in a little while, not so very long, they came to a nice place in the forest, an open place where no trees grew. "Here is a good spot for our show," said Uncle Wiggily. "But there is no one to see us do the tricks," objected Fido. "Oh, yes, there are some ants, and an angel worm, and a black bug, and a grasshopper," said Uncle Wiggily. "They will do to start on, and after they see us do the tricks they'll tell other folks, and we'll have quite a crowd." So they started in to do their tricks. Fido turned a lot of flip-flops, and Uncle Wiggily did a dance on the end of his crutch, and sang a song about a monkey doodle, which the angel worm said was just fine, being quite cute, and the grasshopper made believe play a fiddle with his two hind legs, scratching one on the other, and making lovely music. But all of a sudden, just as Uncle Wiggily was standing on his left ear, and wiggling his feet in the air, which is a very hard trick for a rabbit, what should happen but that out of the woods sprang two boys. "There's the dog! Grab him!" cried one boy. "Never mind about the rabbit. Get the trick dog!" And the boys rushed right up, knocking Uncle Wiggily down, and grabbing Fido Flip-Flop, and they started off through the woods with him, while Uncle Wiggily cried out for them to come back. But they wouldn't. Now please don't feel badly, for I'm going to tell you in the next story how Uncle Wiggily saved Fido, and also how the rabbit went to Arabella Chick's surprise party. That is, I will, if our automobile doesn't turn upside down and break my ice cream cone. End of story 5. Story 6 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garis. Story 6. Uncle Wiggily at the Party. Well, when Uncle Wiggily Longears found that the elephant wouldn't get off his trunk, oh, listen to me. What I meant to say was that when Uncle Wiggily saw those two boys running off with Fido Flip-Flop, the little trick dog, as I told you about in the story before this, the old gentleman rabbit was so surprised at first that he didn't know what to do. "Won't you please come back with that little doggie?" begged Uncle Wiggily, but the bad boys kept right on. I guess they knew how smart Fido was, and they wanted to get up a show with him. Anyhow, they kept on running through the woods, holding him tightly in their arms. "Oh, dear, this is terrible!" exclaimed Uncle Wiggily. "I'll never get any good fortune if Fido has such bad luck, and it was partly my fault, too. For if we hadn't been doing tricks, we would have heard these boys coming, and could have run away. Well, now, I must save Fido." So Uncle Wiggily sat down on a stump, and thought, and thought, and thought of all the plans he could think of to save the doggie from the two boys, and at last he decided the only way to do was to scare them. "Then they'll drop Fido, and run away," said the old gentleman rabbit. "Let me see, how can I scare them? I know, I'll make believe I'm a tiger." So what did that brave Uncle Wiggily do but go to a mud hole, and with his crutch dipped into the mud, he made himself all striped over like a tiger that you see in the circus. Oh, he was a most ferocious sight when he finished decorating himself. Then he hid his satchel in the bushes, and he started off on a short cut through the woods to get ahead of the boys. Faster and faster through the woods went Uncle Wiggily, and he looked so peculiarly terrifying that all the animals who saw him were scared out of their wits, and one old blue jaybird was so frightened that he wiggled his tail up and down and hid his head in a hollow tree. Well, by and by, after a while, Uncle Wiggily got to a place in the woods where he knew those boys, with Fido Flip-Flop, would soon come by. Then the rabbit hid himself in the bushes, so that his long ears wouldn't show, for he knew that if the boys saw them, they would know right away he wasn't a tiger, no matter if he was striped like one. In a few minutes along came the boys, and they were talking about what they were going to do to Fido, and how they would put him in a cage and make him do lots of tricks. All of a sudden there was a rustling in the bushes, and Uncle Wiggily just stuck out his head and part of his body, laying his ears flat back where they could not be seen. But the boys could see the mud stripes, only they didn't know they were just mud, you understand. "Oh, see that!" cried one boy. "Yes, it's a tigery tiger!" exclaimed the other boy. "Let's run!" shouted both the boys together. "The tiger will eat us up!" And just then Uncle Wiggily growled as loudly as he could, a real fierce growl, and he rattled the bushes and stuck out his striped paws, and those boys dropped Fido Flip-Flop and ran away as hard as they could through the woods, leaving Fido to join the rabbit. "Thank you very much for saving me, Uncle Wiggily," said the dog as soon as he got over being frightened. That was a good trick to pretend you were a tiger, but I knew you right away, only, of course, I wasn't going to tell those boys who you were. It served them right for squeezing me the way they did. Now we'll go on, and see if we can find a fortune for you." They went back to where Uncle Wiggily had left his valise, and there it was safe and sound, and inside were some nice things to eat, and the rabbit and doggie had a dinner there in the woods after the mud stripes were washed off. Then they went on, for ever so long, and nothing happened except that a mosquito bit Fido on the end of his nose, and every time he sneezed it tickled him. "Well, I guess we won't have any more adventures to day, Uncle Wiggily," spoke the doggie. But a moment later they heard a rustling in the bushes, and before they could hide themselves, out jumped Arabella Chick, the sister of Charlie, the rooster boy. "Oh, you dear Uncle Wiggily!" she exclaimed. "You're just in time." "What for?" asked Uncle Wiggily. "For the train?" "No, for my party," answered Arabella. "I'm going to have one for all my friends, and I want you to come. Will you?" "Oh, I guess so, Arabella. But you see, I have a friend with me, and—" "Oh, he can come too," spoke Arabella, making a bow to Fido Flip-Flop. So Uncle Wiggily introduced the doggie to the chickie girl, and the chickie girl to the doggie. Then they went on together to the party, which was held in a nice big chicken coop. Oh, I wish you could have been there. It was just too nice for anything. Sammie and Susie Littletail were there, and they were so glad to see Uncle Wiggily again. He said he hadn't been very lucky in finding his fortune so far, but his rheumatism was not much worse, and he was going to keep on traveling. He sent his love to all the folks, and said he'd be home some time later. Then, of course, all the other animal friends were at the party, and they played games of all kinds, including a new one called "Please Don't Sit on My Hat, and I Won't Sit on Yours." It was too funny for anything. Really it was. Then, of course, there were good things to eat. Buddy Pigg passed around the ice cream, and just as he was handing a plate of it to Jennie Chipmunk, it slipped. The ice cream slipped, and went right into Uncle Butter's lap. But the old goat didn't care a bit. He said it reminded him of a pail of paste, and he ate the ice cream, and Nurse Jane Fuzzy Wuzzy got Jennie some more. Then Flip Flop and Uncle Wiggily did some of their tricks, and everyone said they were fine, and they thought it was the best party they had ever been at. But all of a sudden, just as they were playing the game called Jump on the Piano and Play a Queer Tune, there came a knock at the door. "Who's there?" asked Arabella Chick. "I am," answered a voice, "and I want Uncle Wiggily Longears instantly. He must come with me." And they all looked from the window, and there stood a big dog, dressed up like a soldier, and he had a gun with him, and he wanted Uncle Wiggily to come out, and everyone was frightened, for fear he'd shoot the old gentleman rabbit. But please don't get alarmed. I wouldn't have that happen for worlds, and in the next story, if I catch a fish in the milk bottle, and he doesn't bite my finger, I'll tell you about Uncle Wiggily in a parade, and it will be a Decoration Day story. End of story 6. Story 7 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 7. Uncle Wiggily in a Parade. Arabella Chick's party seemed to break up very suddenly when the guests saw that soldier dog with the gun waiting outside the door. Buddy Pigg slipped out of a back window and ran home with his tail behind him. Oh, excuse me, guinea pigs don't have a tail, do they? Anyhow, he ran home, and so did Sammie and Susie Littletail, and Johnnie and Billie Bushytail, and the Wibblewobble children, and Peetie, and Jackie Bow Wow too. But of course, Arabella Chick couldn't run home because she was at home already, so she just looked out of the window once more, and there the dog soldier stood, and he was looking in his gun to see if it was loaded. "Well, is Uncle Wiggily coming out?" called the dog again. "I guess I am, that is. Are you sure you want me?" asked the poor old gentleman rabbit, puzzled like. "Yes, of course I want you," replied the dog. "Then I guess I've got to go," exclaimed Uncle Wiggily, and as he looked for his crutch and valise, "I guess this is the end of my fortune hunting. Good bye, everybody." And he felt so badly that 2 big tears rolled down his eyes. Well, he bravely walked out of the door, and as he did so, the dog soldier with the gun exclaimed: "Ah, here you are at last. Now hurry up, Uncle Wiggily, or we'll be late for the parade." And would you believe it? That dog was good, kind old Percival, who used to be in a circus. And of course he wouldn't hurt the rabbit gentleman for anything. Percival just put his gun to his shoulder and said: "Come on, we'll get in the parade now." "Parade? What parade?" asked Uncle Wiggily. "Oh, my, how you frightened me!" "Why, the Decoration Day parade," answered Percival. "Today is the day when we put flowers on the soldiers' graves, and remember them for being so brave as to go to war. All old soldiers march in the parade, and so do all their friends. I'm going to march, and I'm going to put flowers on a lot of soldiers' graves. I happened to remember that you were once in the war, so I came for you. I didn't mean to scare you. You were in the war, weren't you?" "Yes," said Uncle Wiggily, happy now because he knew he wasn't going to get shot. "I once went to war, and killed a lot of mosquitoes." "Good, I thought so!" exclaimed Percival. "Well, I met Grandfather Goosey Gander, and he said he thought you were at this party, so I came for you. Come on now, the parade is almost ready to start." "Oh, how you did frighten us!" exclaimed Arabella, whose heart was still going pitter-patter. "We thought you were going to hurt Uncle Wiggily, Percival." "Oh, I'm so sorry I alarmed you," spoke the circus dog politely. "I won't do it again." Well, in a little while Percival and Uncle Wiggily were at the parade. The old gentleman rabbit left his satchel at Arabella's house, and only took his crutch, but he limped along just like a real soldier, and Percival carried his gun as bravely as one could wish. Oh, I wish you could have heard the bands playing, and the drums beating, the little kind that sound like when you drop beans on the kitchen oilcloth, and the big drums that go boom, boom, like thunder and lightning, and the fifes that squeak like a mouse in the cheese trap, and then the big blaring horns that make a sound like a circus performance. They were all there, and there were lots of soldiers and horses and wagons, filled with flowers to put on the graves of the soldiers who were so brave that they didn't mind going to war to fight for their country, though war is a terrible thing. When the march began and Uncle Wiggily and Percival stepped out as brave as anyone in all the parade, oh, how fine they looked! And when they marched past, all the animal people, and some real boys and girls, and papas and mammas, clapped their hands and cried hurrah at the sight of the old gentleman rabbit limping along on his crutch, with the dog soldier marching beside him. "Who knows?" whispered Percival to Uncle Wiggily. "Who knows but what you may discover your fortune to day?" "Indeed I may," answered Uncle Wiggily. "Who knows?" Well, that was a fine parade, but something happened. I was afraid it would. But I'll tell you all about it, and you can see for yourself whether or not I was right. All of a sudden one man, with a big horn, a horn large enough to put a loaf of mother's bread down inside the noisy end, all of a sudden this man blew a terrible blast. Umpty umpty umph, umph. My, what a noise he made on that horn. Now, right in front of this man was a little boy duck riding on a pony. Yes, you've guessed who he was. He was Jimmie Wibblewobble. And when that man blew the loud blast, the pony was frightened, and ran away with Jimmie on his back. Faster and faster ran the pony, and Jimmie Wibblewobble clung to his back, fearing every moment he would be thrown off. In and out among the people and animals in the parade, in and out among the trolley cars and automobiles, in and out, and from one side to another of the street ran the frightened pony. "Oh, poor Jimmie will be killed!" cried Percival. "No, he will not, for I will save him!" shouted Uncle Wiggily. So that brave rabbit ran right out to where he saw Munchie Trot, the little pony boy. "Let me jump on your back, Munchie," said Uncle Wiggily, "and then we'll race after that runaway pony and grab off poor Jimmie. Run as fast as you can, Munchie." "I certainly will!" cried Munchie. So Uncle Wiggily got on Munchie's back, and away they started after the runaway pony. Faster and faster ran Munchie, and by this time the other little horsie was getting tired. Jimmie was still clinging to his back and asking him not to run so fast, but the pony was so frightened he didn't listen to the duck boy. Then, just as he was going to run into a hot peanut wagon, and maybe toss Jimmie off into the red hot roaster, all at once Uncle Wiggily, on Munchie's back, galloped up alongside of the runaway pony. And as quick as you can drink a glass of lemonade, Uncle Wiggily grabbed Jimmie up on Munchie's back beside him, and so saved the duck boy's life. And then the runaway pony stopped short all of a sudden, and didn't bump into the hot peanut wagon after all, and he was sorry he had run away, and scared folks. Then the Decoration Day parade went on, and every one said how brave Uncle Wiggily was. But he hadn't yet found his fortune, and so in the story after this, in case our front porch doesn't run away and take the back steps with it, so I have to sleep on the doormat, I'll tell you about Uncle Wiggily in the fountain. End of story 7. Story 8 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 8. Uncle Wiggily in the Fountain. Well, after the Decoration Day parade, and the things that had happened in it, such as the pony running away with Jimmie Wibblewobble, Uncle Wiggily Longears thought he'd like to go off to some quiet place and rest. "Oh, can't you come with me?" asked Percival, the old circus dog. "We'll go to the Bow Wow's house and have something to eat." "No, I'm afraid I can't go," replied the old gentleman rabbit. "You see, I must travel on to seek my fortune, for I haven't found it yet, and I still have the rheumatism." "Why don't you try to lose that rheumatism somewhere?" asked Percival. "I would, if it's such a bother." "Oh, I've tried and tried and tried, but I can't seem to lose it," replied Uncle Wiggily. "So I think I'll travel on. I'm much obliged to you for letting me march in the parade." Then the old gentleman rabbit got his valise, and, with his crutch, he once more started off. He went on, up one hill and down another, over the fields where the horses and cows and sheep were pulling up the grass and chewing it, so the man wouldn't have to cut it with the lawn mower. On he went. Then Uncle Wiggily reached the woods where the ferns and wildflowers grow. "This is a fine place," he said as he sat down on a flat stump. "I think I will eat my dinner." So he opened the satchel and took out a sandwich made of yellow carrots and red beets. And very pretty they looked on the white bread, let me tell you, very nice indeed. Uncle Wiggily was eating away, and he was brushing the crumbs off his nose by wiggling his ears, when, all of a sudden, he heard a cat crying. Oh, such a loud cry as it was! "Why, some poor kittie must be lost," thought the old gentleman rabbit. "I'll see if I can find it." Then the cry sounded again, and, in another moment, out of a tree flew a big bird. "Oh, maybe that bird stuck his sharp beak in the kittie and made it cry," thought Uncle Wiggily. "Bird, did you do that?" he asked, calling to the bird, who was flying around in the air. "Did I do what?" asked the bird. "Did you stick the kittie and make it cry?" "Oh, no," answered the bird. "I made that cat crying noise myself. I am a cat bird, you know." And surely enough, that bird went mew, mew, mew 3 times, just like that, exactly as if a cat had cried under your window when you were trying to go to sleep. "Ha, ha! That is very strange!" exclaimed the rabbit. "So you are a cat bird?" "Yes, and my little birds are kittie birds," was the answer. "I'll show you." So the bird went mew, mew, mew again, and a lot of the little birds came flying around, and they all went mew, mew, too, just like kitties. Oh, I tell you, cat birds are queer things. And how they do love cherries when they are ripe, eh? "That is very good crying, birdies," said Uncle Wiggily, "and I think I'll give you something to eat to pay for it." So he took out from his valise some peanuts that Percival, the circus dog, had given him, and Uncle Wiggily fed them to the cat bird and her kittie birds. "You are so very kind," said the mamma bird, "and if we can ever do you a favor we will." And now listen, as the telephone girl says, those birds are going to do Uncle Wiggily a favor in a short time, a very short time indeed. Well, after the birds had eaten all the peanuts they flew away, and Uncle Wiggily started off once more. He hadn't gone very far before he came to a fountain. You know what that is. It's a thing in a park that squirts up water, just like when you fill a rubber ball with milk or lemonade and squeeze it. Only a fountain is bigger, of course. This fountain that Uncle Wiggily came to had no water in it, for it was being cleaned. There was a big basin with a pipe up through the middle, and this was where the water spouted up when it was running. "This is very strange," said Uncle Wiggily, for he had never seen a fountain before. "Perhaps I can find my fortune in here. I'll go look." So down he jumped into the big empty fountain basin, which was as large as 7 wash tubs made into one. And it was so nice and comfortable there, and so shady. for there were trees near it, that, before he knew it, Uncle Wiggily fell fast asleep, with his head on his satchel for a pillow. And then he had a funny dream. He dreamed that it was raining, and that his umbrella turned inside out, and got full of holes, and that he was getting all wet. "My!" exclaimed Uncle Wiggily, as he gave a big sneeze. "This is a very real dream. I actually believe I am wet." Then he got real wide awake all of a sudden, and he found that he was right in the middle of a lot of wetness, for the man had turned the water on in the fountain unexpectedly, not knowing that the old gentleman rabbit was asleep there. "I must get out of here!" cried Uncle Wiggily, as he grabbed up his valise and crutch. Then the water came up to his little short, stumpy tail. Next it rose higher, up to his knees. Then it rose still faster, up to his front feet, and then almost up to his chin. "Oh, I'm afraid I'm going to drown!" he cried. "I must get out." So he tried to swim to the edge of the fountain. But you can't swim very well with a crutch and a valise, you know, and Uncle Wiggily didn't want to lose either one. Then the water from the top of the fountain splashed in his eyes, and he couldn't see which way to swim. "Oh, help! Help!" he cried. "Will no one help me?" "Yes, we will help you," answered a voice, and up flew the big catbird and her little kitten birds. "Quick, children!" she cried. "We must save Uncle Wiggily, who was so kind to us. Every one of you get a stick, and we'll make a little boat, or raft, for him." Well, I wish you could have seen how quickly the mamma catbird and her kitty birds gathered a lot of sticks and twigs, and laid them together crossways on the water in that fountain basin, until they had a regular little boat. Upon this Uncle Wiggily climbed, with his crutch and valise, and then the mamma catbird flew on ahead, and pulled the boat by a string to the edge of the fountain, where the rabbit could safely get out. So that's how the bunny was saved from drowning in the water. And in the next story, if a big red ant doesn't crawl upon our porch and carry away the hammock, I'll tell you another adventure Uncle Wiggily had. It will be a story of the old gentleman rabbit and the bad dog. End of story 8. Story 9 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This Sleeper-Vox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 9. Uncle Wiggily and the Dog. Uncle Wiggily's rheumatism was quite bad after he got wet in the fountain, as I told you in the other story, and when he thanked the mamma catbird and her kitten birds for saving him, he found that he could hardly walk, much less carry his heavy valise. "Oh, we'll help you," said Mrs. Catbird. "Here, Flitter and Flutter, you carry the satchel for Uncle Wiggily, and we'll take him to our house." "But, mamma," said Flutter, who was getting to be quite a big bird boy, "Uncle Wiggily can't climb up a tree to our nest." "No, but we can make him a nice warm bed on the ground," said the mamma bird. "So you and Flitter carry the satchel. Put a long blade of grass through the handle, and then each of you take hold of one end of the grass in your bills, and fly away with it. Skimmer, you and Darty go on ahead and get something ready to eat, and I'll show Uncle Wiggily the way." So Flitter and Flutter, the two boy birds, flew away with the satchel, and Skimmer and Darty, the girl birds, flew on ahead to set the table and put on the tea kettle on the stove to boil, and Mrs. Catbird flew slowly on over Uncle Wiggily to show him the way. Well, pretty soon, not so very long, they came to where the birds lived. And those good children had already started to make a nest on the ground for the old gentleman rabbit. They had it almost finished, and by the time supper was ready it was all done. Then came the meal, and those birds couldn't do enough for Uncle Wiggily, because they liked him so. When it got dark, they covered him all up with soft leaves in the nest on the ground, and there he slept until morning. His rheumatism wasn't quite so bad when, after breakfast, he had sat out in the warm sun for a while. And after a bit he said, "Well, I think I'll travel along now, and see if I can find my fortune to day. Perhaps I may, and if I do I'll come back and bring you more peanuts." "Oh, that'll be fine and dandy!" cried Flitter and Flutter and Skimmer and Darty. So they said good bye to the old gentleman rabbit, and once more he started off. "My, I'm certainly getting to be a great traveler," he thought as he walked along through the woods and over the fields. "But I don't ever seem to get any place. Something always happens to me. I hope everything goes along nicely today. But you just wait and see what takes place. I'm afraid something is going to happen very shortly, but it's not my fault, and all I can do is to tell you exactly all about it. Wait! There, it's beginning to happen now. All of a sudden, as Uncle Wiggily was traveling along, he came to a place in the woods where a whole lot of gypsies had their wagons and tents, and on one tent, in which was an old brown and wrinkled gypsy lady, there was a sign which read: "Fortunes told here." Ha! If they tell fortunes in that tent, perhaps the gypsy lady can tell me where to find mine, thought Uncle Wiggily. I'll go up and ask her. Well, he was just going to the tent when he happened to think that perhaps the gypsy woman wouldn't understand rabbit talk. So he sat there in the bushes thinking what he had better do, when all at once, before he could wiggle his ears more than 4 times, a great big bad ugly dog sprang at him, barking, oh, so loudly. "Come on, Browser!" cried this dog to another one. "Here is a fat rabbit that we can catch for dinner. Come on, let's chase him." Well, you can just imagine how frightened Uncle Wiggily was. He didn't sit there, waiting for that dog to catch him either. No, indeed, and a bag of popcorn besides. Up jumped Uncle Wiggily with his crutch and his valise, and he hopped as hard and as fast as he could. My, how his legs did twist in and out. "Come on, come!" barked the first dog to the second. I'm coming, woof, woof, bow, bow, wow, barked the second dog. Poor Uncle Wiggily's heart beat faster and faster, and he didn't know which way to run. Every way he turned, the dogs were after him, and soon more of the savage animals came to join the first 2, until all the dogs in that gypsy camp were chasing the poor old gentleman rabbit. I guess I'll have to drop my satchel or my crutch, thought Uncle Wiggily. I can't carry them much farther. Still, I don't want to lose them. So he held on to them a little longer, took a good breath, and ran on some more. He thought he saw a chance to escape by running across in front of the fortune-telling tent, and he started that way, but a gypsy man with a gun saw him and fired at him. I'm glad to say, however, that he didn't shoot Uncle Wiggily, or else I couldn't tell any more stories about him. Uncle Wiggily got safely past the tent, but the dogs were almost up to him now. One of them was just going to catch him by his left hind leg, when one of the gypsy men cried out: "Grab him, Biter! Grab him! We'll have rabbit pot pie for dinner, that's what we'll have!" Wasn't that a perfectly dreadful way to talk about our Uncle Wiggily? But just wait, if you please. Biter, the bad dog, was just going to grab the rabbit, when all of a sudden Uncle Wiggily saw a big hole in the ground. "That's what I'm looking for!" he exclaimed. "I'm going down there and hide away from these dogs." So into the hole he popped, valise, crutch and all, and oh, how glad he was to get into the cool, quiet darkness, leaving those savage, barking dogs outside. But wait a moment longer, if you please. Biter and Browser stopped short at the hole. "He's gone, gotten clean away!" exclaimed Browser. "Isn't that too bad?" "No, we'll get him yet!" cried Biter. "Here, you watch at this hole, while I go get a pail of water. We'll pour the water down under the ground where the rabbit is, and that will make him come out, and we'll eat him." "Good!" cried Browser. So while he stood there and watched, Biter went for the water. But mind you, Uncle Wiggily had sharp ears, and he heard what they were saying. And what do you think he did? Why, with his sharp claws he went right to work, and he dug, and dug, and dug in the back part of that underground place, until he had made another hole, far off from the first one, and he crawled out of that, with his crutch and valise, just as Biter was pouring the water down the first hole. "Aha! I think that this will astonish those dogs," thought Uncle Wiggily, and he took a peep at them from behind a bush where they couldn't see him. And then he hopped on through the woods, to look for more adventures, leaving the dogs still pouring water. And one happened to him shortly after that, as I shall tell you on the next page, when, in case the rocking chair doesn't tip over backwards and spill out the sofa cushion into the rubber plant, the story will be about Uncle Wiggily and the monkey. End of story 9. Story 10 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 10. Uncle Wiggily and the Monkey. Let me see. We left those 2 bad dogs pouring water down the hole to get Uncle Wiggily out, didn't we? And the old gentleman rabbit fooled them, didn't he? He got out of another hole that he dug around the back door, you remember. Well, I just wish you could have seen those two dogs after they had poured pail after pail of water down the hole, and no rabbit came floating up. "This hole must go all the way down to China," said Browser, breathing very fast. "Yes, I'm tired of carrying water," said Biter, and just then another dog cried out: "Why, foolish dogs, the water's all running out the back way!" And surely enough it was. Then they knew Uncle Wiggily had escaped, and they were as angry as anything. But it served them right, I think. "My, I wonder what will happen next," thought the old gentleman rabbit as he hopped along. "That was a narrow escape." So, having nothing else to do, Uncle Wiggily sat down on a nice smooth stump, and he ate some lunch out of his valise. And a red ant came up and very politely asked if she might not pick up the crumbs which the old rabbit dropped. "Of course you may," said Uncle Wiggily kindly, "and I'll give you a whole slice of bread and butter also."
"Oh, you are too generous," spoke the red ant. "I never could carry a slice of bread and butter, but if you will leave it on the stump I'll get some of my friends and we'll bite off little crumbs, a few at a time, and in that way carry it to our houses."
So that's what Uncle Wiggily did, and the ants had a fine feast, and they were very thankful. Uncle Wiggily asked them if they knew where he could find his fortune.
"Why don't you go to work instead of traveling around so much?" asked the biggest red ant. "The best fortune is the one you work for."
"Is it? I never thought of that," said Uncle Wiggily. "I will look for work at once. I wonder if you ants have any for me?"
"We'd like to help you," they said, "but you see you are so large that you couldn't get into our houses to do any work. You had much better travel along and work for some one larger than we are."
"I will," decided the old gentleman rabbit. "I'll ask every one I meet if they want me to work for them." So he started off once more, and the first place he came to was a house where a mouse lady lived. "Have you any work I can do?" asked Uncle Wiggily politely. "What work can you do?" asked the mouse lady. "Well, I can peel carrots or turnips with my teeth," said Uncle Wiggily, "and I can look after children and tell them stories, and I can do some funny tricks." "Then you had better go join a circus," interrupted the mouse lady. "I have no children, and I can peel my own carrots, thank you. As for turnips, I never eat them." "Then I must go on a little further," said Uncle Wiggily, as he picked up his valise and walked off on his crutch. So he went on until he came to another house in the woods, and he knocked on the door. "Have you any work I can do?" inquired Uncle Wiggily politely. "No, get away and don't bother me," growled a most unpleasant voice, and the rabbit was just going down the steps, when the door opened a crack, and a long, sharp nose and a mouthful of sharp teeth, and some long legs with sharp claws on them, were stuck out. "Oh, hold on!" cried the voice. "I guess I can find some work for you after all. You can get up a dinner for me." And then the savage creature, who had opened the door, made a grab for the rabbit and nearly caught him. Only Uncle Wiggily jumped away, just in time, and the wolf, for it was he who had called out, caught his own tail in the crack of the door and howled most frightfully. "Come back! Come back!" cried the wolf, but, of course, Uncle Wiggily wouldn't do such a foolish thing as that, and the wolf couldn't chase after him, for his tail was fast in the door hinge. "My, I must be more careful after this how I knock at doors and ask for work," the old gentleman rabbit thought. "I was nearly caught that time. I'll try again, and I may have better luck." So he walked along through the woods, and pretty soon he heard a voice singing, and this is the song as nearly as I can remember it. "Here I sit and wonder what I'm going to do. I've no one to help me. I think it's sad, don't you? I have to play the fiddle, but still I'd give a cent to any one who'd keep the boys from crawling in the tent." "Well, I wonder who that can be," thought Uncle Wiggily. "He'll give a cent, eh, to any one who keeps the boys from crawling in the tent. Now, if that isn't a bear or a fox or a wolf, maybe I can work for him and earn that money. I'll try." So he peeped out of the bushes, and there he saw a nice monkey all dressed up in a clown's suit, spotted red, white and blue. And the monkey was playing a tune on a fiddle. Then, all of a sudden, he laid aside the fiddle, and began to beat the bass drum. Then he blew on a horn, next he jumped up and down, and turned a somersault, and then, finally, he grabbed up a whip with a whistle in the tail. I mean in the end,
and that monkey began to pretend he was chasing make-believe boys from around a real tent that was in a little place under the trees. "Oh, I guess that monkey won't hurt me," said Uncle Wiggily as he stepped boldly out, and as soon as the monkey saw the rabbit, he called most politely: "Well, what do you want?" "I want to earn a cent by chasing boys from out the tent," replied Uncle Wiggily. "Good!" cried the monkey. "So you heard me sing. I'm tired of being the whole show. I need some one to help me. Come over here and I'll explain all about it. If you like it, you can go to work for me, and if you do, your fortune is as good as made." "That's fine!" cried Uncle Wiggily. "And I can do tricks in the show, too." "Fine!" exclaimed the monkey, hanging by his tail from a green apple tree. "Now I'll explain." But just as he was going to do so, out jumped a big black bear from the bushes, making a grab for Uncle Wiggily. He might have caught him, too, only the monkey picked up a coconut pie off the ground and hit the bear so hard on the head that the savage creature was frightened and ran away, sneezing, leaving the monkey and the rabbit alone by the show tent. "Now we'll get ready to have some fun," said the monkey, and what he and Uncle Wiggily did, I'll tell you in the following story, which will be about the old gentleman rabbit and the boys. That is, if the molasses jug doesn't tip over on my plate and spoil my bread and butter peanut sandwich. End of story 10. Story 11 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 11. Uncle Wiggily and the Boys. "Well," said the monkey, after the bear had run away, "I guess we can now sit down and talk quietly together, eh, Uncle Wiggily?" "Yes," said the old rabbit gentleman. "But what is it that you want me to do? I heard you sing that funny little song about the boys coming in the tent, but I don't exactly understand." "That's just it," replied the monkey. "You see, it's this way. I have a little sort of a circus show here, and the troublesome boys don't want to pay any money to get in. So when my back is turned, they crawl under the tent, and so they see the show is for nothing, just like at the circus." "Oh, so that's how it is?" asked Uncle Wiggily. "And you want me to keep out the boys?" "That's it," said the monkey. "Here's a big stick with which to tickle the boys who crawl in under the tent without paying. Now I'll practice my tricks." So the monkey did a lot of tricks. He stood on his head, and he hung by his tail, and he danced around in a circle. Then he pounded the drum, not so hard as to hurt it, but hard enough to make a noise, and he played the fiddle and blew on the horn, and then he ran inside the tent and jumped over a bench, making believe it was an elephant. And he did all sorts of funny tricks like that. He even stood on his head and made a funny face. "That will make a very nice show," said Uncle Wiggily after he had watched the monkey. "Now I'll stay outside and keep the boys from coming in unless they pay their money, and you can be inside doing the tricks." "And I'll give you money for working for me," said the monkey. "Then perhaps you can make your fortune. And, besides that, I'll give you a coconut, and you can make a coconut pie with it." "That will be fine!" cried Uncle Wiggily. So he and the monkey practiced to get ready for their show. It was a nice little tent in which it was to be given, and there were seats for the people who would come, and a platform, and flying rings, and trapeze bars, and paper hoops, and all things like that, just the same as in a real circus. Well, finally the time came for the show. It was the day after Uncle Wiggily got to the place where the tent was, and he had slept that night in a hammock put up between two trees. "Now we're almost ready for the show," said the monkey to the old rabbit gentleman, after a bit. "So I hope you will be sure to keep out the troublesome boys. They always creep under the tent and see the show for nothing. I can't have that going on if I'm to make any money." "Oh, I'll stop 'em!" declared Uncle Wiggily. "And here's the club to do it with," said the monkey, handing Uncle Wiggily a stick. "Oh, I don't know about that," answered the rabbit. "I never hurt boys if I can help it. Perhaps I shan't need the club. I'll leave it here." So Uncle Wiggily hid the club under an apple tree, but the monkey said it would be needed, and he wanted Uncle Wiggily to keep it, and take a whip, too. But the old rabbit shook his head.
"I'll try being kind to the boys," he said. "You let me have my way, Mr. Monkey." Well, pretty soon, not so very long, the show began. The monkey went inside the tent, and he blew on the horn, and he made music on the fiddle, and sang a funny song about a little great big pussy who had a red balloon. She stuck a pin inside it, and it played a go bang tune. Of course, as soon as the show started, the people came crowding up to the tent, just as they do at the circus. There were men and women and little boys and girls and big boys and girls, and they all wanted to get inside to see what the monkey was doing. But do you know, I believe all that he was doing was playing monkey doodle tricks. But of course, I might be mistaken. Well, as it happens, some boys didn't have any money with which to pay their way inside the tent. And, of course, as it will sometimes happen, one boy said to another, "Hey, I know a way we can crawl in under the tent and see the show, and not have anything to pay." "But that wouldn't be fair," spoke the other boy. "It would be cheating, and there's nothing meaner in this world than to cheat, whether it's playing a baseball game or going to a circus." "I guess you're right," said the first boy. "What shall we do, though? I want to see the show." "Well, we must be fair anyhow," spoke the second boy. "We can't crawl in under the tent, but perhaps if we ask the monkey to let us in for nothing, he'll do it." "Very well, we will," said the first boy. So they went up to the monkey and asked if they could go in for nothing. But, of course, he wouldn't let them. "May we crawl in under the tent, then?" asked the second boy. "If Uncle Wiggily will let you," answered the monkey, blinking his two eyes and wrapping his tail around his neck. So the boys tried to crawl in under the tent, and as soon as Uncle Wiggily saw them he rushed up and cried out: "Hey, hold on there! Nobody must go under the tent. You must buy a ticket." And he shook a feather at the boys, and instead of hitting them, he only tickled them, and didn't hurt them a bit, for they sneezed. Well, those boys were very troublesome. They kept on trying to crawl under the tent, and Uncle Wiggily rushed here, there and around the corner trying to stop them, and he cracked the lash on his whip, just like the man in the circus ring. But those boys kept on trying to crawl under the tent, for the monkey had given them permission, you see. So, finally, Uncle Wiggily said: "I'll give those boys a little show myself, outside the tent, for nothing. Then maybe they'll stop bothering me." So he stood on his left ear, and then on his right, and then he jumped through a hoop, and rolled over, and barked like a dog, and all the boys that had tried to crawl under the tent to see the monkey show for nothing ran out to see Uncle Wiggily's show. He did lots of tricks, and kept them all from crawling in under the tent, and he even ate a popcorn ball, standing on his hind legs, and wiggling his left ear with a pinwheel on it. Then, after a while, the monkey show was all over, and the monkey said: "Uncle Wiggily, you did very well. You treated those troublesome boys just fine. So I'll give you 10 pennies, and perhaps they will make you have a good fortune." Then the monkey gave Uncle Wiggily 10 pennies, and he went to sleep in a feather bed, while the old gentleman rabbit went down to the drug store to get an ice cream soda. And what happened after the show was over, and what Uncle Wiggily did after he had his ice cream, I'll tell you in the next story, which will be about Uncle Wiggily in a balloon. That is, if our pussy cat doesn't get all covered with red paint and look like a tomato growing on a strawberry vine. So watch out, and don't let that happen. End of story 11. Story 12 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 12. Uncle Wiggily in a Balloon. Well, just as I expected, something happened to my pussy cat named Peter. He didn't fall into the pot of red paint, but he either ran away or else someone took him. So now I have no pussy cat. But I'll tell you a story about Uncle Wiggily just the same. The old gentleman rabbit stayed with the monkey for several days, and he was so kind and good to the troublesome boys, Uncle Wiggily was, I mean, and he did such funny tricks for them, that they didn't crawl under the tent any more, and the monkey could do his tricks in peace and quietness. "Oh, you have been a great help to me," said the monkey to the rabbit, "and I would like you to work for me all summer. I am now going to travel on to the next town, and if you like you may go with me and keep the boys there from crawling under the tent." "No, I thank you," replied Uncle Wiggily slowly, as he put some bread and butter, and a piece of pie, into his satchel. "I think I will travel farther on by myself, and seek my fortune." "Well, I'm sorry to see you go," said the monkey, "and here is 50 cents for your work. I hope you have good luck." And then Uncle Wiggily started off again, over the fields and through the woods, seeking his fortune, while the monkey got ready to move his show to the next town. Well, for some time nothing happened to the old gentleman rabbit. He walked on, and once he saw a little red ant trying to drag a piece of cake home for dinner. The cake was so big that the ant was having a dreadful time with it, but Uncle Wiggily took his left ear and just brushed that cake into the ant's house as easily as anything. "My, how strong and brave you are!" cried the little red ant. "Won't you let me get you a glass of water?" "I would like it," said the rabbit, "for it is quite warm today." Well, that ant got Uncle Wiggily a glass of water, but you know how it is, an ant's glass is so very small that it only holds as much water as you could put on the point of a pin, and really, I'm not exaggerating a bit when I say that Uncle Wiggily drank 17,426 and a half ant glasses of water before he had enough. It took all the ants for a mile around to bring the water to him, but they didn't mind, because they liked him. Then the old gentleman rabbit traveled on again, and when it came night, he slept under a haystack. "I am sure to find my fortune to day," thought Uncle Wiggily as he got up and brushed the hayseed out of his ears the next morning. It was a bright, beautiful day, and he hadn't gone very far before he heard some fine music. "My, there must be a hand organ around here," he said to himself, "and perhaps there is another monkey. I'll watch out." So he stood on his hind legs, Uncle Wiggily did, and the music played louder, and all of a sudden the rabbit looked down the road, and there was a nice circus, and the white tents, all covered with flags, and bands playing, and elephants squirting water through their long noses over their backs to wash the dust off. And lions and tigers were roaring, and the horses were running, and the fat lady was drinking pink lemonade, and oh, it was fine! "I've got 50 cents, and I guess I'll go to the circus," thought Uncle Wiggily, and he was just entering the big tent when he happened to see a man with a lot of red and green and yellow and pink balloons. Now you would have thought that man would have been happy having so many balloons, but he wasn't. He looked very sad, that man did, and he was almost crying. "Poor man," thought Uncle Wiggily. "Perhaps he has got no money to go in the circus. I'll give him mine." "Here is 50 cents, Mr. Man," said the old gentleman rabbit kindly. "Take it and go see the elephant eat peanuts." "Oh, that is very good of you," spoke the balloon man, "but I don't want to go to the circus. I want to sell my balloons, but no one will buy them." "Why not?" asked the rabbit. "Oh, because there are so many other things to buy," said the man. "Red peanuts and lemonade in shells. Oh, I've got that wrong. It is red lemonade, isn't it? And peanuts in shells. But no matter. What I need," said the man, "is to get the people to listen to me. I need to make them look at me, and when they see what fine balloons I have, they'll buy some. But there are so many other things to look at that they never look toward me at all." "Ha! I know the very thing!" cried Uncle Wiggily. "You ought to have some one go up in a balloon. That would surprise the people like anything. They'd be sure to look at that, and they'd all run over here and buy all your balloons." "Yes, but who can I get to go up in a balloon?" asked the man. "I will!" cried Uncle Wiggily bravely. "Perhaps I may find my fortune up in the sky, so I'll go in a balloon." Well, the man thought that was fine. So he made a little basket for the rabbit to sit in, and he fastened the basket to a big red balloon, and then he took care of the rabbit's valise for him, while Uncle Wiggily got ready to go toward the clouds, taking only his crutch with him. When the man had everything fixed, and when the rabbit was sitting in the basket as easily as in a soft chair at home, the man cried: over here, everybody! Over here, people! A rabbit is going up in a balloon! A most wonderful sight! Over here!" And then the man let go of the balloon, and Uncle Wiggily shot right up toward the sky. Only, of course, the man had a string fast to the balloon to pull it down again. Up and up went the balloon carrying Uncle Wiggily, up and up. And my, how surprised the people were!
They rushed over and bought so many balloons that the man couldn't take in the money fast enough, and Uncle Wiggily stayed up there, high in the air, looking for his fortune. And then, all of a sudden, a bad boy, with a bean shooter, shot at the balloon, and bang! It burst, with a big hole in it. Down came Uncle Wiggily, head over heels, bursted balloon, basket, crutch and all. "Oh, he'll be killed! He'll be killed!" cried all the people. "No, he'll not! We'll save him!" cried Dickie and Nellie Chip Chip, the boy and girl sparrow who happened to be at the circus. "We'll save Uncle Wiggily!" So up into the air they flew, and before Uncle Wiggily could fall to the ground, Dickie and Nellie grabbed the basket in their bills, and, by fluttering their wings, they let it come very gently to earth, just like a feather falling, and the rabbit wasn't hurt a bit. But, of course, the balloon was broken. So that's how Uncle Wiggily went up in a balloon and came down again. But he hadn't yet found his fortune. And now, in the next story, if our fire shovel doesn't go out to play in the sand pile and get its ears full of dirt, I'll tell you about Uncle Wiggily in an automobile. End of story 12. Story 13 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 13. Uncle Wiggily in an Auto. Well, after Uncle Wiggily had been saved from the falling balloon by Dickie and Nellie Chip Chip, the sparrow children, the people were so excited that they wanted the bad boy arrested for making a hole in the balloon with his bean shooter. "No, let him go," said the rabbit gentleman kindly. "I'm sure he won't do it again." And do you know, that boy never did. It was a good lesson to him. Then the people bought all the balloons, until the man had none left, and I guess if he could have sent for 47 more, he would have sold them also. "I will pay you good wages to stay with me and go up in a balloon every day," said the man to the rabbit. "You would help me do lots of business." "No," said Uncle Wiggily, "I must travel on and seek my fortune. I didn't find it up in the air." But before the old gentleman rabbit traveled on, he went into the circus with Dickie and Nellie, for they had an extra ticket that Bully the Frog was going to use, only Bully went in swimming and caught cold, and had to stay home. So Uncle Wiggily enjoyed the show very much in his place. "Give my love to Sammie and Susie Littletail and to all my friends," said the rabbit, as he took his crutch and valise, after the circus was over, and started to travel on, looking for his fortune. Well, the only place he came to that day was an old hollow stump, and on the door was a card which read: "Come in." "Ha! Come in, eh?" said Uncle Wiggily. "I guess not much. You can't fool me again. There is a bad bear or a savage owl inside that stump, and they want to eat me. I'll just stay outside." He was just hurrying past when the door of the stump house opened, and an old grandfather fox stuck out his head. This fox was almost blind, and he had no teeth, and he had no claws, and his tail was just like a last year's dusting brush that the moths have eaten most up. And altogether that fox was so old and feeble that he couldn't have hurt a mosquito, so Uncle Wiggily wasn't a bit afraid of him. "I say, is there anything good to eat out there?" asked the fox, looking over the tops of his spectacles at the rabbit. "Anything nice and juicy to eat?" "Yes, I am good to eat," said Uncle Wiggily, "but you are not going to eat me. Good bye." "Hold on!" cried the old fox. "Don't be afraid. I can only eat soup, for I have no teeth to chew with. So unless you are soup, you are of no use to me." "Well, I'm not soup, but I know how to make some," replied the rabbit, for he felt sorry for the grandfather fox. So what do you think our Uncle Wiggily did? Why, he went into the fox's stump house and made a big pot full of the finest kind of soup, and the rabbit and the fox ate it all up, and because the fox had no teeth or claws, he couldn't hurt his visitor. "I wish you would stay with me forever," said the old fox, as he blinked his eyes at Uncle Wiggily. "I have a young and strong grandson coming home soon, and you might show him how to make soup." "No, thank you," replied the rabbit. "I'm afraid that young and strong grandson of yours would want to eat me instead of the soup. I guess I'll travel on." So the old gentleman rabbit took his crutch and valise and traveled on. Well, pretty soon it began to get dark, and Uncle Wiggily knew night was coming on, and he wondered where he could stay, for he didn't see any haystacks to sleep under. He was thinking that he'd have to dig a burrow in the ground for himself, and he was looking for a soft place to begin, when, all at once, he heard a loud
honk, honk, back of him in the road. "Ha! An automobile is coming," said Uncle Wiggily. "I must get out of the way." So he hopped on ahead, going down the road quite fast, until he got to a place where there were prickly briar bushes on both sides of the highway. "My, I'll have to keep in the middle of the road if I don't want to get scratched," said the rabbit. And then the automobile horn behind him honked louder than ever. "They certainly are coming along fast," thought Uncle Wiggily. "If I don't look out I'll be run over." So he hopped along quicker than before, until, all of a sudden, as he looked down the road, he saw a savage dog standing there. "Well, now, isn't that just my bad luck?" cried Uncle Wiggily. "If I go on the dog will catch me, and if I stand here the auto will run on top of me. I just guess I'll run back and see if there is a hole where I can crawl through the bushes." So he started to run back, but no sooner had he done so, than the dog saw him and came rushing at him with a loud bow wow wow, bow wow wow. "My, but he's a savage," thought the rabbit. "I wonder if I can get away in time." And then the auto honked louder than before, and all of a sudden it came whizzing down the road, right toward the rabbit. "Oh, dear, I'm going to be caught sure!" cried Uncle Wiggily, and indeed it did look so, for there was the dog running from one direction, and the auto coming in the other, and prickly briar bushes were on both sides of the road, and Uncle Wiggily couldn't crawl through them without pulling all the fur off his back and his ears too. "Honk, honk!" went the auto. "Bow wow!" went the dog. "Oh, dear!" cried Uncle Wiggily. Then he thought of a plan. "I'll give her a big run and long jump, and maybe I can jump over the auto, and then the auto will bump into the dog and I will be safe," he cried. So he took a long run, and just as the auto was going to hit him, Uncle Wiggily gave a big jump right into the air. He didn't jump quite quickly enough, however, for one of the big rubber tires ran over his toe. But he wasn't much hurt, and what do you think he did? Why, he landed right in the auto, on the seat beside a little boy. And that dog was so frightened of the automobile that he howled and yowled, and his teeth chattered, and he tucked his tail between his legs and ran home. "Oh, the bunny! The bunny!" cried the little boy as he saw Uncle Wiggily. "May we keep him, Papa?" "I guess so," said the boy's papa. "Anyhow, his foot is hurt, and we'll take care of him until it gets well. My, but he is a good jumper, though." So the man stopped the auto, and picked up Uncle Wiggily's crutch and valise, which the old gentleman rabbit had dropped when he jumped upon the seat beside the boy, and then the car went on. And Uncle Wiggily wasn't a bit frightened at being in an auto, for he knew the boy and man would be kind to him. "Perhaps I shall find my fortune now," the rabbit gentleman said, and the little boy patted him on the back and stroked his long ears. Now, in the story after this, I'll tell you what happened to Uncle Wiggily at the little boy's house. And in case our door key doesn't get locked out, and have to sleep in the park, you are going to hear about Uncle Wiggily in a boat. End of story 13. Story 14 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 14. Uncle Wiggily in a Boat. "Poor rabbit!" exclaimed the little boy in the automobile, as he rubbed Uncle Wiggily's ears. "I wonder if his foot is much hurt, Papa?" "I don't know," answered the man, as he steered the machine down the road. "I'll have the doctor look at it." "Oh, indeed, it isn't hurt much," spoke up Uncle Wiggily. "The rubber tire was soft, you see, but my rheumatism is much worse on account of running so fast." "What's this? Well, of all things! This rabbit can talk!" cried the man in surprise. "Of course he can, Papa," said the boy. "Lots of rabbits can talk. Why, there's Sammie and Susie Littletail. They can talk, and maybe this rabbit knows them." "I'm their uncle," said the old gentleman rabbit, making a bow. "Oh, then you must be Uncle Wiggily Longears!" cried the little boy. "Oh, I've always wanted to see you, and now I can." "Well, it is very strange to meet you this way," said the man. "Still, I am glad you are not hurt, Uncle Wiggily. And so you are out to seek your fortune?" For the rabbit had told them about his travels. "Perhaps you would like to rest at our house for a few days. We can give you a nice room with a brass bed and a bathtub to yourself, and you can have your meals in bed, if you can't come downstairs." "Oh, I am not used to that kind of a life," said the old gentleman rabbit. "I would rather live out of doors. If you can get me some clean straw to lie on, and once in a while a carrot or a turnip, and a bit of lettuce and some cabbage leaves now and then, I'll be all right. And as soon as my foot is well, I'll travel on." "Oh, what good times we'll have!" cried the little boy. "Our house is near a lake, and I have a motor boat, and I'll give you a ride in it." Well, Uncle Wiggily thought that would be nice, and he was rather glad, after all, that he had jumped into the auto. So pretty soon they came to the place where the boy lived. Oh, it was a fine large house, with lots of grounds, lawns and gardens all around it, and there were several dogs on the place, but the little boy spoke to them all, telling them that the rabbit was his friend Uncle Wiggily, who must not be bitten or barked at on any account. "Oh, we heard about him from Fido Flip Flop," said big dog Rover. "We wouldn't hurt Uncle Wiggily for 2 worlds, and part of another one, and a bag of peanuts." So Uncle Wiggily was given a nice bed of straw in one of the empty dog houses, and the boy got him some cabbage and lettuce, and the rabbit made himself a sandwich of them, with some bread and butter, which he had in his satchel. Then the rabbit and the dogs talked together, and the rabbit told of his travels and what had happened to him so far. "Wonderful! Wonderful!" exclaimed the old dog Rover. "You should write a book about your fortune." "I haven't found it yet, but perhaps I may, and then I'll write the book," said Uncle Wiggily, combing out his whiskers. That night the boy put a soft rag and some salve on the rabbit's sore foot, and he also gave him some liniment for his rheumatism, and in the morning Uncle Wiggily was much better. He and the boy and the dogs had lots of fun playing together on the smooth, green, grassy lawn. They played tag and hide and go seek, and a new game called "Don't Let the Ragman Take Your Rubber Boots," and the dog Rover pretended he was the ragman. "Now then, we'll all go out in my motor boat," said the boy. So he and Uncle Wiggily and the dogs went down to the lake, and, surely enough, there was the boat, the nicest one you could wish for. There was a little cabin in it, and seats out on deck, and a little engine that went choo choo, and pushed the boat through the water. In the boat they all had a fine ride around the lake, which was almost like the one where you go to a Sunday school picnic, and then it was time for dinner. And, as a special treat, when they got on shore, Uncle Wiggily was given carrot ice cream, with chopped up turnips in it, and oh, how good it was to him! Well, the days passed, and Uncle Wiggily was getting so he could walk along pretty well, for his foot was all cured, and he began to think of going on once more to seek his fortune. And then something happened. One day the boy went out alone in a rowboat to see if he could find any fish, and before he knew it his boat had tipped over, spilling him out into the water, and he couldn't swim. Wasn't that dreadful? "Oh, help! Help!" he cried, as the water came up to his chin. My, but it's awful to be tipped over in a boat, and I hope if you can't swim you'll never go out in one alone. And there was that poor boy splashing around in the water, and almost drowned. "Save me! Save me!" the boy cried. "Oh, save me!" Well, as it happened, Uncle Wiggily was walking along the shore of the lake just then. He saw the little boy fall out of the boat, and he heard him cry. "I'll save you if I can!" exclaimed the brave old rabbit. "Come on, Rover, we'll go out in the motor boat and rescue him." "Bow wow! Bow wow! Sure! Sure!" cried Rover, wagging his tail. So he and Uncle Wiggily ran down and jumped into the motor boat, and they knew just how to start the engine and run it, for the boy had showed them. Bang! Bang! went the engine. Whiz! Whiz! went the boat through the water. "Faster! Faster!" cried Uncle Wiggily, who was steering the boat, while Rover ran the engine. "Go faster!" So Rover made it go as fast as he could, and then all of a sudden that boy went down under the water out of sight. "Oh, he's drowned!" cried Uncle Wiggily sorrowfully. But he wasn't, I'm glad to say. Just then came Nurse Jane Fuzzy Wuzzy, the muskrat, swimming, and she dived away down under and helped bring that boy up to the top of the water. And then Uncle Wiggily and Rover grabbed him as the muskrat lifted him up, and they pulled him into the motor boat, and so saved his life. And oh, how thankful he was when he was safe on shore, and he was careful never to fall in the water again.
Now, in case the clothes wringer doesn't squeeze all the juice out of my breakfast orange, I'll tell you in the next story about Uncle Wiggily making a cherry pie. End of story 14. Story 15 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 15. Uncle Wiggily Makes a Pie. Do you remember the little boy whom Uncle Wiggily helped save after he fell out of the boat? Well, that boy's papa was so glad because Uncle Wiggily had helped save the little chap from drowning that he couldn't do enough for the old gentleman rabbit. "You can stay here forever, and have carrot ice cream every day if you like," the man said. "Oh, thank you very much, but I think I'll travel on," replied Uncle Wiggily. "I have still to seek my fortune." "Why, I will give you a fortune," said the boy's papa. "I will give you $1,000,000,000 and a penny besides." "That would be a fine fortune," spoke the rabbit, "but I would much rather find my own. It is no fun when you get a thing given to you. It is better to earn it yourself, and then you think more of it." "Yes, that is so," said the man. "Well, we will be sorry to see you go." Uncle Wiggily started off the next day, once more to seek his fortune, and the little boy felt so sad at seeing him go that he cried and put his arms around the old gentleman rabbit and kissed him between the ears, and Uncle Wiggily felt badly too. Well, the old gentleman rabbit traveled on and on for several days after that, sleeping under haystacks part of the time, or in empty hollow stumps, and sometimes he dug a burrow for himself in the soft ground. And one afternoon, just as the sun was getting ready to go to bed for the night, Uncle Wiggily came to an open place in the woods where there was a cave made of a lot of little stones piled up together. "My, I wonder who lives there," thought the rabbit. "It is too small for a giant to live in, but there may be a bad bear or a savage fox there. I guess I'd better get away from here." Well, Uncle Wiggily was just going when all at once a voice cried out, "Here, hold on there!" The rabbit looked back and he saw a great big porcupine, or hedgehog, you know. Those animals like a big gray rabbit, only their fur is the stickery pickery kind, like needles, and the quills come out and stick in anybody who bites a hedgehog. So I hope none of you ever bite one, and they won't bite you if you don't bother them. So as soon as Uncle Wiggily saw that it was Mr. Hedgehog who was speaking, he wasn't a bit afraid, for he knew him. "Oh, it's you, is it?" asked the rabbit. "I'm real glad to see you. I was going to travel on, but—" "Don't say another word!" cried the hedgehog heartily. "You can stay in my cave all night. I have 2 beds, and it's a good thing I have, for if you slept with me you might get full of my stickery stickers." "Yes, I guess I had better sleep alone," said Uncle Wiggily with a laugh. "But it seems to me, Mr. Hedgehog, that you are not looking well." "I'm not," answered the porcupine, as he shivered so that several of his quills fell out on the grass. "I'm suffering for some cherry pie. Oh, cherry pie! If I only had some, I know I'd feel better at once. I just love it." "Why don't you make some yourself?" asked Uncle Wiggily. "I have tried," replied the hedgehog. "I've tried and tried again, but somehow it never comes out right. Here, I'll show you. I made a cherry pie just before I looked out of the door and saw you. I'll show it to you." He went into his little stone house, and Uncle Wiggily went with him. "There's the pie. It's no good," cried the porcupine, as he pointed to something on the table. Well, as soon as Uncle Wiggily saw it, he laughed so hard that his ears waved back and forth. "What's the matter? I don't see anything funny," asked Mr. Hedgehog, shivering so that more quills fell out. "Why, you've gone and put the cherry pits into the pie instead of the cherries," said the rabbit. "That's no way to do. You must take out the stones from inside the cherries and put the outside part of them inside the pie and throw the inside or stony part of the cherries away." "Oh, good land!" cried the hedgehog. "No wonder I couldn't eat the pie. You see, I thought cherries were like peanuts. You know you throw away the outside part of the peanut and eat the inside." "Yes, and the cherries are just the opposite," said the rabbit, laughing again. "And you eat the outside of a cherry and throw away the pit or stone that is inside. Now I'll make you a cherry pie." "I wish you would," said the porcupine. "I'll go get the cherries." So he went out into the orchard, and he shot his sharp, stickery quills, like little arrows, at the cherries on the tree, and they fell down, so he could pick them up in a basket. I mean, the cherries fell down, though of course the quills did also, though the hedgehog didn't pick them up. And while he was doing that, Uncle Wiggily was making the pie crust. He took flour and lard and water and mixed them together, and then he put in other things. Oh, well, you just ask your mamma, or the cook, what they were, for I might get it wrong. And soon the pie crust was ready. Then Uncle Wiggily built a hot fire in the stove, and he waited for Mr. Hedgehog to come in with the cherries. And pretty soon the porcupine came back with his basket full, and he and Uncle Wiggily shelled the peanuts, I mean the cherries, taking out the pits. "Now I'll put them in a pie, and put sugar on them, bake it in the oven, and soon it will be done, and we can eat it," said the rabbit. "Oh, joy!" cried the hedgehog. "That will be fine." So Uncle Wiggily put the cherries in the pie, and threw the pits away, and he put the pie in the oven, and then he and Mr. Hedgehog sat down to wait for it to bake. And oh, how delicious and scrumptious it did smell, if you will excuse me for saying so. Well, in a little while the pie was baked, and Uncle Wiggily took it from the oven. "I can hardly wait to eat it!" cried the hedgehog, and just then there came a terribly loud knock on the door. "Oh, maybe it's that bad fox come for some of my pie!" exclaimed the hedgehog. "If it is, I'll stick him full of stickery stickers." But then he went to the door. There stood old Percival, the circus dog, and he was crying as hard as he could cry. "Come in," invited Uncle Wiggily. "Come in and have some cherry pie, and you'll feel better." So Percival came in, and they all three sat down and ate the cherry pie all up, and sure enough Percival did feel better, and stopped crying. Then the circus dog and Uncle Wiggily stayed all night with Mr. Hedgehog, and they had more cherry pie next day, and it was very fine and sweet. Now, if our cook makes some nice watermelon sandwiches with maple syrup on them for supper, I'll tell you in the next story about Uncle Wiggily and old